Hello YouTube. Today on the topic of injury prevention, I'm going to give you a method that is going to alleviate the risk of a hamstring pull by almost 100%. Outside of potential risks that you're going to encounter because of your predispositions or your technique, which I can't really help you with, there is something that I found is one of the biggest reasons why people actually pull their hamstrings. And it's actually something I realized can be applied to any muscle because the hamstring is not really special in that aspect, but the way we treat our hamstrings is that specialty aspect that makes it so injury prone. So hamstring pulls, most people pull their hamstrings when they do deadlifts, and the deadlift is a positive only movement, and every time I see someone pull their hamstrings, they pull it on the positive portion, it's not on the negative, and there's a very easy reason to understand behind that. So if you think about movement patterns and the way we target our muscles, most of the time we're going to do a negative followed by a positive or a positive followed by a negative. If the positive opens, as I explained in the positive versus negative video of the hypertrophy series, most of the time the negative is going to be either rushed or ignored altogether. It's not necessarily true, but most of the time. Whereas if the lift opens with a negative, you don't really have a choice. Unless you're doing a negative only, you have to go through the positive afterwards. Why? Because it resets the movement and you can start doing the negative again, then the positive. That's what is called a rep. When you look at a deadlift, what does a deadlift do? You use the positive to get up, so you use the hamstrings when they're already compressed like a spring, they're already lengthened, and they contract to help you pull that weight up, and then you put the weight, the bar down. This is not a bad thing. The issue is that for most people, that aspect of the hamstring development and stimulus is the only thing they do for that muscle group. Meaning that they are going to apply the logic of compound movement only for hypertrophy and bodybuilding, which is not, it's not a bad idea, it's something that I promote, but they do it in a way that is too minimalistic, which creates an environment for that injury to occur. Why? Can you tell me, can you cite me, can you give me an example of one other muscle that you only work through a positive phase? I personally cannot think of a single one. Every time you do a bicep curl, you go down and then you go up, okay? Same for the quads. They experience both faces of the coin. The hamstrings, for some people, experience only one side of the coin, the positive. And the issue is that these people are going to do a ton of variations of the deadlift, but they fail to realize that the variation aspect they apply to the deadlift for the hamstrings is always in the positive. So they will do a post deadlift, they will do a stiff leg deadlift, they might do rack pulls. Those are all great movements, but they are not providing the hamstring with that lengthening aspect. And this is why the pull occurs. In my opinion, from my experience, what I've seen is that they pull from the floor and the hamstring just snaps. And the reason why is because the hamstring is not prepared for that lengthening. So what happens is they pull, they use that spring energy of the hamstring that is going to contract to get them up, but at some point they stall, and it's always the same. I always see those injuries the same way. There's a pause in the lift, sometimes the bar dips, or it's stalled altogether, and they grind through it because they want to bring that bar up, and there's a slight portion of the movement where the hamstring is lengthened quick, then contracts again, and it snaps. It's a pull. Sometimes it's a sprain, sometimes it's a pull, sometimes it's off the bone, in which case, good luck, and that injury occurs, and that's it. And for naturals, there's a very easy fix, and the fix you already have figured it out, it's negatives. You need to train your hamstrings in the negatives. And now you might be thinking to yourself, okay, I'm going to start doing my deadlifts and I'm going to focus on the negative. Wrong. Don't do that. This is called rushing to conclusions, and you're going to end up perverting a lift that is perfectly fine because you think it's what caused injury. This is not what caused injury. Your lack of practice of the negative is what caused injury. You need to keep your deadlift as it is. I will explain in another video why the deadlift done only in the positive makes perfect sense for hypertrophy. You don't need to do it in the negative. There's a very easy reason to understand. If you do both positive and negative on the deadlift, you are going to send back your ability to perform on the positive because you're going to tire yourself. And even though you are stronger in the negative, those reps that you accumulate lowering the bar down slowly tire you out. And because we want to promote progression on the positive portion of the deadlift, this is not a solution. So put that aside, don't think about that. What you're going to do instead is, when you think about the variations of the deadlift or of any type of hip hinge or hamstring dominant movement, you're going to try and implement in your training movements that are going to lengthen the hamstring so that it is not always in that position of contraction, it can also lengthen. When you do that, keep in mind also that what causes the hamstring pull is that lengthening, but it's a lengthening that occurs at too high of an intensity where the hamstring is just unprepared. If I were to use an example, because as I said, the deadlift is really the only example, but let's pick a guy. That guy has only done pin bench press for a year or two, okay? So he only presses on the positive and then he just lets the bar slam on the negative, okay? If you took that guy and he somehow decided to go slow on that negative, there's a very strong chance he would hurt his shoulder or his pecs. Why? These muscles are completely unprepared to handle the negative. And some people disagree with that, but to me, a negative that is not resisted doesn't count as a negative. It doesn't register because you're just letting gravity do the work. Whether you slowly lower a bar in a hip hinge position or you just let it fall and hit the ground, yes, the bar traveled the same distance, it was still in your hands, you were still in control, but on one hand, the muscles lowered the bar, and on the other, the gravity lowered the bar. Or if you want to be nitpicky, on the first hand, you resisted gravity as it lowered the bar. And that's an important distinction. So you're going to have to add movements that are going to lengthen the hamstring. And as I said, keep in mind that that lengthening is what created the injury in the first place, but you're going to do it in intensity windows for higher reps that is not going to be conducive to that. It's going to condition the hamstring. So not only are you going to get an hypertrophic effect, it's also an injury prevention effect. Greatest lifts for that are Romanian deadlift, back hyperextension, good mornings. Pay attention with the good mornings. Why? The stretch on the hamstring can be quite extreme. Some people also get lower back pain from them because they don't know how to use the lower back as a bridge. They use it as a crane instead, which is not what you're supposed to use that part of your body for. I'll make videos for that. I've already sort of started touching upon that, but these are my go-to. And the reason why I told you to be careful with that lengthening is because certain lifts, like the good morning, might lead to a stretch that is uncontrolled or uncontrollable even, that leads to injury by themselves. So for example, certain type of glute ham raises, certain variations that can be quite extreme. I think the Nordic curls can also fall into that category. If you are heavy and you've never done them, they're going to put you in a position that if something goes wrong, the only thing that can snap is the hamstring. It's the one thing that can snap. So be careful. There are a lot of lifts that are like this. The good morning fall into that as well. Lifts that I consider to be the most dangerous are the ones that, in the case of failure, do not give you a way out. Meaning that the failure leads to injury. Pretty much you know that. It's the equivalent of doing bench with no spotter and you can't do the roll of shame. If you fail, you die, okay? Some of those lifts are not as critical, but they come to mind when it comes to that. For example, the good morning, you go down in the hole, in the good morning, even if you have safeties, if you go up and you fell, you're going to go through a range of motion where you're not in control anymore. And because you had to have safeties on the side that don't damage your ability to go down and actually endure the range of motion, most likely they're put underneath. So you're still going to have to go through an extra lumbar flexion and you can still get injured even with safeties. Same logic with some hamstring movements. They are unforgivable. Okay, so I always like to prescribe them in lower intensity windows because you already have the deadlift for your high intensity stuff. The deadlift, which is, by the way, a very safe lift if you know how to do it technically and properly. So that's going to be the injury prevention aspect of the hamstring pull. You're going to find that over time, the way your hamstring feels is going to be different. First off, you're going to gain mobility, you're going to feel more nimble, and the risk of hamstring pull is going to be pretty much eradicated. Of course, when you implement that type of practice, you cannot just jump into that and hope for great results within 2 weeks. It's over time. Most of the time, most likely, you spend an inordinate amount of time just doing the positive on the hamstring movements. So you're going to have to be patient. You have to pay your debt. Okay, you sort of mistreated your hamstrings. Now it's time for rehab, and you have to be patient with that, with your weight selection, etc., your frequency, etc. But the two portions of the range of motion for that movement pattern are essential, and it's the same for every movement pattern, really. If you only train one, so only the negative or only the positive, you're opening yourself up for a lot of trouble down the line, and this needs to be avoided. But because the hamstring tend to be the one body part that is usually the victim of that type of mistreatment, this is the one that also is the easiest to treat, because most likely that's just the one fix that you will need. You don't need to do foam rolling or anything like this. You just need to complement your training with negative portions. So that's going to be that. Not really going to give you any technical aspects or cues, because most of the time when I see people injure their hamstrings, it's not really an issue in terms of technique. The technique is going to be more relevant for the injury of the lower back, but I've already discussed that in my lower back rounding video. So if you want to actually take a look at that and learn more about that, check the injury prevention playlist, it's in there. So I'm going to leave you with that when it comes to the prevention of hamstring pulls. I hope this was informative. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.